Billionaire CEO sees his ex at the airport with a baby, minutes before his honeymoon flight. "She's mine." The words escaped Carlos Salvador's lips not as a question, but as a realization that shattered his perfectly constructed world. Biologically speaking, yes. Evelyn's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut through steel as she adjusted the baby carrier in her hand. In every other meaningful way, that remains to be seen. He stared at the infant with olive skin and dark, piercing eyes, his mother's eyes, unmistakable Salvador eyes that had haunted family portraits for generations. The truth hit him like a physical blow, leaving him struggling to breathe in the polished private terminal where, just moments before, his only concern had been whether the Dom Perignon had been properly chilled for his honeymoon flight. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the soft ambient music of the exclusive lounge. "I tried, Carlos, 6 times. Your new assistant made it quite clear you were unavailable. Then I saw the engagement announcement in Financial Times." Evelyn glanced toward the blonde woman, watching them from across the terminal. "I believe your fiancé is waiting. Don't let me keep you from your honeymoon." As an announcement called for boarding, Evelyn turned to leave, taking his child, his daughter, with her, vanishing before he could process the magnitude of what had just happened. Have you ever experienced a moment that forces you to question every choice you've ever made? A split second where your past collides with your future, and suddenly the life you've carefully built seems hollow and meaningless? If you've ever stood at such a crossroads, you'll understand why Carlos Salvador's world would never be the same after this chance encounter. Stay with me, because this story about choices, consequences, and second chances might just change how you think about what truly matters in life. If this already has you gripped, hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The private terminal at Heathrow gleamed with subtle opulence, all muted grays and polished surfaces designed to whisper wealth rather than shout it. Carlos Salvador stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching his private jet being fueled on the tarmac. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, a habit born of precision rather than impatience. 90 minutes until departure to Maldives. 90 minutes until the honeymoon that would cement his new beginning. "The champagne has been stocked according to your specifications, Mr. Salvador," his assistant said, materializing beside him with practiced invisibility. "Miss Reynolds is on her way. Her car just passed through security." "Thank you, Andrew," Carlos replied, his Spanish accent barely detectable after 2 decades of international business. At 42, he carried success like a second skin. His bespoke Tom Ford suit rested on shoulders accustomed to bearing the weight of a global empire. Salvador Industries had expanded from his father's modest shipping company to a technology and logistics behemoth worth billions. The upcoming marriage to Vanessa Reynolds, daughter of his largest American investor, represented both personal happiness and strategic alliance. At least, that's what he'd been telling himself. Carlos turned from the window, scanning the terminal's private lounge. His security team maintained a respectful distance, their earpieces and vigilant eyes the only indication they weren't fellow travelers. He'd chosen this terminal specifically for its exclusivity. No crowds, no paparazzi, no chance encounters. And then she walked in. Evelyn Keith moved through the security check with quiet confidence that came from navigating difficult spaces. Her chestnut hair was shorter than he remembered, falling just below her shoulders in soft waves. She wore a simple cream blouse and tailored navy pants, practical travel clothes that somehow looked elegant on her slender frame. But it was the infant carrier in her hand that froze Carlos mid-stride. A baby. Evelyn was carrying a baby. Something ancient and instinctual seized Carlos's chest. He calculated swiftly. 14 months since they'd last seen each other. 14 months since that rain-drenched night when everything had fallen apart. 14 months was more than enough time for a child to be born. Their gazes connected across the polished floor, and for a heartbeat, the world condensed to that single point of contact. Recognition. Shock. A flood of unspoken history. Evelyn faltered, her composure cracking momentarily before she recovered. She hadn't expected him here, of course not. This terminal served dozens of private flights daily. The coincidence was cruel mathematics, a statistical improbability made flesh. Carlos found himself moving toward her before conscious thought could intervene. Andrew made a small sound of warning behind him, but Carlos waved him off without looking back. "Evelyn," he said when he reached her, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "Carlos," she replied, her American accent wrapping around his name with familiar precision. "I didn't expect to see you here." Evidently, his eyes dropped to the carrier, where a bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket was just visible. "You have a child?" It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes. This is Mia." Carlos felt the world tilt beneath his Italian leather shoes. "Mia," he repeated, the name settling like a stone in his stomach. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn angled the carrier toward him. Inside, a baby girl with olive skin and dark eyes gazed up at him with unsettling directness. Carlos recognized his mother's eyes instantly, the same shape, the same intensity that had stared back at him from childhood photographs. Salvador eyes, unmistakable and penetrating. "She's mine," he said, and it wasn't a question either. Biologically speaking, yes, Evelyn's voice carried an edge that could cut glass. In every other meaningful way, that remains to be seen. Before Carlos could respond, a voice called from across the terminal. "Carlos, darling. Sorry I'm late. The traffic was abysmal." Vanessa Reynolds approached in a cloud of expensive perfume and designer luggage, her diamond engagement ring catching the light with every gesture. She stopped abruptly when she noticed Evelyn and the baby carrier. "Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting." "Not a meeting," Carlos said, his mind racing to control a situation rapidly spinning beyond his grasp. "Vanessa, this is Evelyn Keith. An acquaintance. Evelyn, this is Vanessa Reynolds, my fiancée." "Fiancée," Evelyn repeated, her expression carefully neutral. "Congratulations." Vanessa's smile remained fixed as her gaze darted between Carlos and the baby carrier. "Thank you. Are you flying out today as well?" "Yes," Evelyn replied, "to London. I have a photography assignment." "Evelyn is a photojournalist," Carlos explained, the inadequacy of the description burning in his throat. "War zones, humanitarian crises, natural disasters." Evelyn had captured them all with unflinching honesty that had earned her international recognition. "Award-winning," he added, as if that detail mattered in this moment of colliding worlds. "How fascinating," Vanessa said with practiced interest. "And your baby, will someone be caring for her while you're working?" "Mia goes where I go," Evelyn replied simply. "We're a package deal." The subtext hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Carlos," Andrew interrupted, his professional tone a relief in the suffocating tension. "The pilot needs to speak with you about the flight plan." "Of course." Carlos turned to Vanessa. "Would you mind checking on the luggage? I just need a moment." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. She was intelligent enough to sense something significant happening, but she nodded and allowed Andrew to escort her toward the check-in desk. When they were alone, Carlos turned back to Evelyn, struggling to find words adequate for the magnitude of the moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "I tried," Evelyn replied, shifting the carrier to her other hand. "I called your office 6 times the week after I found out. Your new assistant said you were unavailable. I emailed twice, no response. Then I saw the announcement of your engagement in Financial Times 3 months after we ended. It seemed clear you had moved on." Carlos felt heat rise up his neck. "Elena never told me you called." Elena was doing her job, protecting the boss from complications. I was definitely a complication. Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "Besides, you made your choice very clear that night, Carlos. I can't do this anymore, Evelyn. We want different things. I need someone who understands my world. Remember?" He remembered. The words had tasted like ash even as he'd spoken them. "I had a right to know about my child," he said, anger finally breaking through shock. "Yes," Evelyn conceded, surprising him. "You did. But rights come with responsibilities, Carlos. You chose your world, boardrooms and billion-dollar deals and marriages that make strategic sense. I chose mine, messy and unpredictable and real. I needed to protect Mia from becoming collateral damage in a life that had no room for her. You had no right to make that decision for me," Carlos insisted, his voice low and intense. "Perhaps not," Evelyn replied, "but I made it for her." She glanced toward Vanessa, who was watching them intently from across the terminal. "And it seems I made the right call. You're about to leave for your honeymoon. Would knowing about Mia have changed anything? Or would she just be an inconvenient secret, a financial obligation, a topic to avoid at dinner parties?" The truth of her words struck him like physical blows. Carlos had spent his adult life building an empire, measuring success in acquisitions and assets. Children had been a distant future consideration, not an immediate reality. Before he could formulate a response, a voice announced the boarding of Evelyn's flight to London. She adjusted her grip on the carrier and her shoulder bag. "That's me," she said. "Congratulations on your marriage, Carlos. I wish you happiness." "Wait," Carlos said, desperation edging into his voice. "We need to talk about this, about Mia, about arrangements." "I'm staying at the Langham in London for 2 weeks," Evelyn replied after a moment's consideration. "If you're serious about being in Mia's life, you can contact me there after you return from your honeymoon. If not, please don't disrupt our lives for a passing sense of obligation that will fade once the shock wears off." She turned to leave, but Carlos caught her arm gently. "She has my mother's eyes." Something softened in Evelyn's face. "Yes, she does. And your stubbornness. She never gives up on what she wants, even at 8 months old." With that, she walked away, leaving Carlos standing alone amidst the luxury he'd surrounded himself with, suddenly aware of its hollowness. Vanessa approached cautiously. "Carlos, is everything all right? Who was that woman, really?" Carlos looked at his fiancée, beautiful, compatible, appropriate, and saw their future together with sudden clarity. It was a good future, comfortable and advantageous, but it was built on calculation rather than passion, convenience rather than truth. "We need to talk," he said. "If you've ever found yourself standing at a crossroads torn between the life you planned and the life that suddenly seems possible, give this video a thumbs up. I want to know how many of you understand what Carlos is feeling right now, that moment when everything you thought you wanted is suddenly called into question. Let me know in the comments what you think Carlos should do. But first, let's go back to understand how we got here. 2 years before that fateful airport encounter, Carlos Salvador attended a charity gala for climate refugees in Madrid. These events had become obligatory social appearances after his father's heart attack left Carlos in charge of the family business, and he approached them with diplomatic efficiency rather than genuine interest. Until he saw her. Evelyn Keith stood near a display of her photographs, stark, powerful images of families displaced by rising sea levels in the Philippines. Her simple black dress stood out among the ornate gowns and jewels that adorned most female attendees. While others wore wealth as a costume, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had witnessed both the worst and the best of humanity through her camera lens. "The juxtaposition is remarkable," Carlos said, approaching one particularly striking image of a child standing in floodwater, a broken television floating beside him. Modern consumption meeting ancient consequences. Evelyn turned, assessing him with keen hazel eyes. "Most people just say it's sad and move on to the canapes. I'm not most people," Carlos replied with a small smile. "No, you're Carlos Salvador," she said, recognition flickering across her features. "Your shipping company transported relief supplies after the typhoon last year. You've done your homework. I do my research when photographing disaster zones. It helps to know which corporate logos might appear on the aid packages." Her direct gaze carried no accusation, merely observation. "And what did your research tell you about me?" he asked, finding himself genuinely curious. "That you increased your humanitarian logistics division by 40% after your father stepped back from day-to-day operations. That your company has the lowest carbon footprint in your industry despite being the third largest, and that you rarely attend these functions without leaving early." Carlos laughed, surprised by her accuracy. "Are you always this direct, Miss Keith?" "Evelyn," she corrected. "And yes, life's too short for small talk. I've watched people lose everything in seconds. It changes your perspective on social niceties." That first conversation lasted 3 hours, long after Carlos would normally have made his excuses and departed. They debated corporate responsibility, effective humanitarian aid, and whether art could truly change perspectives. She challenged his assumptions about efficiency and success, while he questioned her belief that individual stories could impact systemic problems. By evening's end, Carlos had missed 2 important calls and canceled his morning meeting, unprecedented actions for a man whose calendar was typically scheduled to the minute. He asked for her number with an unusual lack of calculation. Their first date took place at a small, family-owned restaurant in Madrid's Old Quarter rather than the Michelin-starred establishments Carlos typically frequented. Evelyn arrived with wind-blown hair and stories of the street protest she'd photographed that morning. She spoke with her hands, passionate and articulate, making the business people at neighboring tables seem bloodless and dull by comparison. "You don't fit into any category, I understand," Carlos admitted over dessert. "Is that a problem?" Evelyn asked, not defensively but with genuine curiosity. "No," he replied, surprising himself with his certainty. "It's refreshing." Their relationship developed despite logistical challenges. Evelyn's assignments took her to Myanmar for 3 weeks, then to the Arctic for a climate change series. Carlos divided his time between Madrid, London, and New York as Salvador Industries continued its global expansion. Yet somehow, they created a connection that transcended conventional patterns. When Evelyn was in Europe, Carlos adjusted his schedule to be wherever she landed. When she returned exhausted from documenting natural disasters or humanitarian crises, he created space for her to decompress, sometimes in silent companionship, sometimes in passionate reunion. He learned to recognize when she needed to process the trauma she witnessed through her lens and when she needed distraction from it. For her part, Evelyn adapted to his world with surprising ease, though not without commentary. She attended corporate events when their schedules aligned, engaging board members in discussions that left them both charmed and slightly unsettled. She understood the pressures Carlos faced as he stepped into his father's role, offering perspective rather than judgment when work consumed him. "You have the capacity to transform your industry," she told him one night as they lay in his Madrid penthouse, the city lights creating patterns on the ceiling. "Your father built something impressive, but you could make it meaningful." "Meaningful and profitable aren't always compatible," Carlos replied, though her words resonated more than he admitted. "They can be, if you're brave enough to reimagine what success looks like." In those moments, Carlos glimpsed a future different from the one he'd always envisioned, one where success wasn't measured solely by market share and profit margins, but by impact and purpose. It both exhilarated and terrified him. For 18 months they created a relationship that defied easy categorization, not quite traditional, but deeply committed. Carlos found himself seeking Evelyn's perspective on business decisions, valuing her outsider viewpoint that often identified opportunities or concerns his executive team overlooked. She began scheduling longer breaks between assignments, finding that for the first time, returning to someone felt as compelling as leaving for somewhere new. Then Carlos's father died. The heart attack came without warning, turning a routine board meeting into chaos. Carlos was in London when it happened, and Evelyn was documenting drought conditions in Australia. By the time she could return to Europe, the funeral had passed and Carlos was drowning in the aftermath of succession. Board members who had respected Alejandro Salvador's leadership now questioned his son's every decision. Investors requested meetings to discuss the future direction of the company. Competitors circled, sensing vulnerability during the transition. Carlos worked 20-hour days, missing sleep and meals, determined to prove he could preserve and expand his father's legacy. Evelyn returned to find a different man than the one she'd left, closed off, defensive, surrounded by advisors who viewed her with thinly veiled suspicion. Who is she, really? Carlos overheard his father's longtime friend and board member asking his CFO, a photojournalist who appears when it's convenient, what does she want from him? "She's a distraction he can't afford right now," his mother's cousin added. The Salvador heir needs stability, not someone who disappears to war zones on a whim. These whispers grew louder when an important Middle Eastern investor questioned Carlos's judgment after meeting Evelyn at a company function. Her forthright comments about human rights abuses in regions where they operated had created diplomatic tension that threatened a $100 million deal. "Your father understood business requires certain compromises," the board chairman told Carlos afterward. "Personal relationships shouldn't interfere with corporate responsibilities." The pressure mounted as Salvador Industries faced its first quarterly decline in 15 years, a temporary setback due to supply chain disruptions, but one that intensified scrutiny on Carlos's leadership. During the same period, Walter Reynolds, their largest American investor, began mentioning his daughter Vanessa's interest in European operations. She had an MBA from Wharton, a perfect social pedigree, and an understanding of the delicate dance between corporate interests and public perception. "She speaks your language," Reynolds commented during a private dinner. Sometimes that compatibility makes all the difference in navigating challenging times. The collision of these pressures came to a head on a rainy Madrid evening. Evelyn had just returned from a 3-week assignment documenting climate refugees in Bangladesh, eager to reconnect. She found Carlos in his home office, surrounded by reports and projection models, a half-empty bottle of scotch beside his computer. "You're working too hard," she said, kissing his temple. "Come to bed." "I can't," he replied, not looking up. "The Singapore acquisition is faltering. Reynolds is threatening to reduce his position if we don't show stronger quarterly numbers." "Then let him," Evelyn said simply. "If his support is contingent on short-term gains over long-term vision, maybe you're better off without it." Carlos looked up then, frustration evident. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have 5,000 employees depending on your decisions. You don't have a family legacy to protect. No, I just have a Pulitzer Prize nomination and 20 years documenting how corporate decisions impact real people, she replied, her own fatigue and jet lag sharpening her tone. But please, continue explaining business to me. The argument escalated from there, Carlos defensive about the pressures he faced, Evelyn frustrated by his unwillingness to consider alternative approaches. Old tensions surfaced, her travel schedule, his increasing conservatism in business practices, the whispers from his board about her suitability as a partner for someone in his position. They think I'm using you, she said bluntly when he finally admitted the board's concerns. That I'm some kind of social climbing opportunity. I know you're not, Carlos insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. Do you? Evelyn asked quietly. Because sometimes I wonder if you're starting to believe them. If you're looking at me and seeing a liability rather than a partner. The silence that followed her question held the answer neither wanted to acknowledge. I can't do this anymore, Evelyn, Carlos finally said, the words emerging with surprising ease considering how they devastated him as he spoke them. We want different things. I need someone who understands my world. I understand your world perfectly, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. I just don't think it's worth sacrificing everything else for. And I'm sorry that you do. She left that night, the rain washing away her footprints as she walked out of his life. Carlos told himself it was the right decision, for the company, for his family's legacy, for his future. He threw himself into work with renewed determination, restructured the executive team, and stabilized the company's position. 3 months later, when Walter Reynolds suggested a more formal alliance between their families through his daughter Vanessa, Carlos approached the relationship with pragmatic consideration. Vanessa was intelligent, socially adept, and understood the world he inhabited. Their courtship progressed with comfortable predictability, culminating in an engagement announcement in Financial Times. If he sometimes woke in the night reaching for someone who wasn't there, if he found himself scanning international news for any mention of Evelyn Keith's latest work, if certain songs or scents triggered memories he couldn't suppress, these were weaknesses he learned to ignore. Until that moment at Heathrow when the past and present collided, and Carlos Salvador found himself staring at the daughter he never knew existed. Now, in his penthouse overlooking London, Carlos paced while Vanessa sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, her engagement ring catching the light as she twisted it nervously. A child, she repeated for the 3rd time since they'd left the airport. You have a child with this photographer. I just found out myself, Carlos said, still struggling to process the reality. Evelyn never told me she was pregnant. And you believe her? That the child is yours? Vanessa's voice carried the carefully neutral tone she used when discussing potentially problematic business associates. Yes. Carlos stopped pacing, meeting Vanessa's gaze directly. The timing aligns perfectly. And the baby, Mia, she has my mother's eyes. Salvador eyes. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind visibly working through implications and scenarios. What do you intend to do about it? I don't know yet, Carlos admitted, the unfamiliarity of uncertainty unsettling him. But I can't simply ignore that I have a daughter. Of course not. We'll need to establish paternity legally, then arrange appropriate financial support, and perhaps visitation when practical. Vanessa spoke as though outlining a business proposal. Our legal team can draft an agreement that protects your interests while providing for the child. This doesn't have to derail our plans. Carlos stared at her, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity what he'd been avoiding for months. Vanessa's response was perfectly reasonable, exactly what a supportive partner should offer. Yet it felt hollow, a strategic solution to a human situation that required more than strategy. Our honeymoon, he said slowly. I don't think we should go tomorrow. Obviously, Vanessa agreed. We can postpone until this situation is stabilized. Perhaps next month, once the legal framework is in place. No, Carlos said, the word emerging with surprising firmness. I don't think we should get married at all. Vanessa stilled, her composure cracking for the first time. Because of this child? Carlos, unexpected children are hardly unprecedented in families like ours. Arrangements can be made that satisfy all parties. It's not about arrangements, Carlos replied, struggling to articulate the seismic shift occurring within him. Seeing Evelyn today, learning about Mia, it forced me to confront something I've been avoiding. I made a mistake when I ended our relationship. I chose security over substance, appearance over authenticity, and I'm the security and appearance in this scenario. Vanessa's voice held a dangerous edge. You're brilliant and beautiful, and would make an excellent partner for someone who loves you completely, Carlos said gently. But I've been using our relationship as a shield against making harder choices about what I really want. That's not fair to either of us." Vanessa stood abruptly, dignity wrapping around her like armor. "I see. Well, at least you've realized this before we made it legal." She removed the 5-carat diamond from her finger and placed it on the coffee table with precise movements. "I assume you'll inform our families, since this was as much a business alliance as a personal one." "I'll speak with your father directly," Carlos promised. "The merger discussions can proceed independently of our personal situation." Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle. "How practical of you. You know, for someone who just claimed to be choosing substance over security, you're still thinking like a businessman." The observation struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. Vanessa gathered her purse and moved toward the door, then paused. "Whatever you're imagining, some romantic reconciliation with your photographer, and your instant family, reality rarely matches fantasy, Carlos. People don't transform overnight, no matter how dramatic the revelation." With those parting words, she left, the door closing quietly behind her. Carlos stood alone in the silent penthouse, Vanessa's warning echoing in his mind. She was right, of course. People didn't change overnight, but sometimes a single moment could illuminate years of self-deception, forcing a reckoning that had been long overdue. He moved to his home office and opened his laptop, searching for information about Evelyn's recent work. The search yielded a series on climate displacement that had garnered international awards, photographs that captured both environmental devastation and human resilience with unflinching honesty. There was no mention of a child in any of the articles, no hint that she had balanced motherhood with her demanding career for the past 8 months. Carlos felt a surge of respect mingled with shame. While he'd been constructing a life designed to meet others' expectations, Evelyn had been creating one true to herself and raising his daughter alone. He picked up his phone and canceled the honeymoon arrangements, the private jet reservation, the villa in the Maldives. Then he called his executive assistant. "Andrew, clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Family emergency." "Sir, is everything all right?" Andrew's voice carried genuine concern beneath his professional tone. "No," Carlos replied honestly, "but I'm hoping it will be." Before we continue with Carlos's journey toward redemption, I want to talk directly to you. We all face defining moments in life, crossroads where we must choose between the path of expectation and the path of authenticity. Carlos spent years building a life that looked perfect from the outside while feeling increasingly hollow within. Now, faced with the daughter he never knew existed, he's being forced to confront the choices that led him here. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself wondering whether you're living the life you truly want or the life others expect of you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mr. Kingsley Luck's stories for more powerful narratives about life's most challenging moments and the courage it takes to change course when necessary. Your support allows me to continue bringing these meaningful stories to light. Now, let's see if Carlos can find the courage to rebuild what he destroyed 14 months ago. 2 weeks later, Evelyn sat cross-legged on the hotel room floor, camera in hand, capturing Mia's determined efforts to stack wooden blocks. The afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over her daughter's concentrated expression. These quiet moments were precious. The assignments that had once taken her to conflict zones around the world had been carefully selected since Mia's birth, focusing on European locations with proper medical facilities and safe accommodations. A knock at the door interrupted the peaceful scene. Evelyn checked her watch, confused. Room service wasn't scheduled, and her assistant wasn't due until evening to discuss tomorrow's shoot. Through the peephole, she saw Carlos, alone, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the power suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked like the man she'd fallen in love with 2 years ago, before his father's death had thrust him fully into the corporate spotlight. She opened the door, Mia balanced on her hip. "You came," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "I told you I would." Carlos's eyes went immediately to Mia, who regarded him with solemn curiosity. "May I come in?" Evelyn stepped back, allowing him into the suite. "Where's Vanessa? I thought you'd be in the Maldives for another week." Carlos moved to the center of the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "The wedding is postponed, indefinitely. We're not together anymore." The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Because of Mia?" Evelyn asked, protectiveness flaring in her chest. "Carlos, I didn't tell you about her to disrupt your life or force you to—" "Not because of Mia," he interrupted gently. "Because of me, because seeing you at the airport made me confront what I've been avoiding for 14 months. I made a mistake, Evelyn, the biggest mistake of my life. Mia squirmed in Evelyn's arms, reaching toward the wooden blocks abandoned on the floor. Evelyn set her down, watching as she crawled determinedly back to her construction project. "You made a choice," Evelyn corrected, keeping her voice neutral. "You chose your father's legacy, your investors' expectations, a life that made sense to you." "I don't believe in mistakes, Carlos. I believe in choices and consequences." "Then I chose wrong," Carlos said simply, "and I've been living with the consequences every day since. Seeing you with our daughter," his voice caught on the word, "only confirmed what I already knew. But this isn't about us, not right now. This is about Mia, about me being her father. If you'll let me—" Evelyn studied him, looking for the calculating businessman, the man who had ended their relationship because she didn't fit into his world. Instead, she saw raw vulnerability and determination that mirrored their daughter's expression as she stacked blocks with single-minded focus. "Being a father isn't a part-time commitment," she said carefully. "It's not board meetings you can reschedule or investments you can delegate. It's 3 a.m. fevers and first steps and a lifetime of showing up, even when it's inconvenient." "I know that," Carlos replied, his gaze steady. "My own father was absent for most of my childhood, building the company that I inherited. I spent my life trying to earn the approval of a man who was never there. I won't do that to Mia." "Fine words," Evelyn acknowledged. "But I've heard your pretty words before, Carlos. They didn't mean much when you were explaining why we couldn't work, why I didn't understand your responsibilities, why you needed someone who would fit seamlessly into your world." Carlos flinched but didn't look away. "I deserve that. I deserve much worse. But I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be better than who I was. Not just for Mia's sake, but because it's who I want to be." Mia chose that moment to topple her tower of blocks, sending them clattering across the floor. Instead of crying, she laughed, delighted by the destruction she'd caused, and immediately began gathering blocks to start again. "She's resilient," Carlos observed, a smile touching his lips. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, feeling something shift in her chest. "She gets that from both of us, I think." She took a deep breath, weighing her daughter's needs against her own protective instincts. "I'm returning to New York next week. I've taken a position with National Geographic, still photography, but based from their headquarters with limited travel. Mia needs stability, and I needed to build something sustainable for us both." "New York," Carlos repeated, hope flickering in his eyes. "Salvador Industries has its American headquarters there." "I know." Evelyn met his gaze directly. "If you're serious about being in Mia's life, about being her father, we can arrange visitation once we're settled. Supervised at first. We'll need legal documentation, of course, outlining rights and responsibilities." "Of course," Carlos agreed immediately. "Whatever you need, whatever makes you comfortable." "I just want to know her, Evelyn. To be part of her life." Evelyn nodded. "Decision made." "Then we'll start there. Just to be clear, this is about Mia, not us. Whatever was between us is in the past." Something flickered across Carlos's face, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded. "I understand. Mia comes first. Do you believe people can truly change? Is Carlos sincere in his desire to be a father, or will his old priorities reassert themselves once the shock wears off? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's see what happens when intentions meet reality. The New York autumn painted Central Park in brilliant oranges and golds as Carlos waited on a bench near the playground. He checked his watch. He was 15 minutes early, a deliberate choice for this first official visitation. The legal papers had been signed last week, establishing paternity and outlining initial arrangements, supervised visits twice weekly, gradually increasing as trust was established. He spotted them approaching from the east side entrance, Evelyn pushing a stroller, her hair caught by the breeze, looking more relaxed than she had in London. When Mia saw him, she bounced in her stroller, her expressive face lighting up with recognition. "Da," she called, the abbreviated word sending a shock through Carlos's system. In the 3 weeks since they'd met, Mia had apparently decided who he was. "She's picking up words quickly," Evelyn explained as they reached him. "I've been showing her your picture and saying Dada. I thought it would make this easier." The gesture of inclusion, that Evelyn had been preparing Mia for these visits rather than treating them as an intrusion, touched Carlos deeply. "Thank you," he said simply, then crouched to Mia's level. "Hello, Princessa. Are you ready to play?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of playground equipment, leaf collecting, and Carlos's crash course in parenthood. Mia was mobile but unsteady, requiring constant vigilance as she explored her environment with fearless curiosity. Carlos found himself fully engaged, his ever-present phone forgotten in his pocket, his attention wholly focused on this small person who shared his DNA. "She's getting tired," Evelyn observed as Mia's exploration became less enthusiastic. "We should probably head back." "Of course," Carlos agreed immediately, though reluctance tightened his chest. These brief windows into his daughter's life felt simultaneously precious and insufficient. "Same time Thursday?" "Yes." Evelyn hesitated, then added, "You did well today. She responds to you." The simple acknowledgement meant more than any business accolade Carlos had ever received. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Twice weekly visits expanded to include occasional dinners at Evelyn's Brooklyn apartment, where Carlos learned to navigate high-chair mechanics and the complex art of coaxing a willful infant to eat vegetables. He canceled a meeting in Tokyo to attend Mia's pediatrician appointment, rescheduled a board presentation to be present when she took her first unassisted steps. Each time he showed up, consistently attentively, prioritizing Mia over work demands that had once seemed non-negotiable, he felt Evelyn's cautious walls lowering slightly. She began asking his opinion on childcare decisions, included him in discussions about Mia's development, shared small victories and challenges from the days he wasn't present. 2 months into this new arrangement, Carlos arrived for his regular visit to find Evelyn looking exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes visible despite her attempt at concealer. "Rough night?" he asked as she led him into the apartment. "Mia has an ear infection," Evelyn explained, her voice ragged from lack of sleep. "She was up every hour. The pediatrician prescribed antibiotics, but they haven't kicked in yet." Carlos peered into the nursery where Mia was finally napping, her cheeks flushed with fever. "Why didn't you call me?" "It's not your designated day," Evelyn replied, then immediately looked embarrassed by the formality. I didn't want to disrupt your schedule. You mentioned the investor meeting today." "Evelyn," Carlos said quietly, "I'm her father. If she's sick, call me. The investors can wait." "That's not the Carlos Salvador I knew a year ago," Evelyn observed, too tired to filter her thoughts. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He made a decision in that moment. "Go sleep. I'll stay with Mia. I'll wake you if her fever increases or when she needs her next dose of medicine." Evelyn looked ready to protest, then surrender crossed her features. "Are you sure? She's not exactly pleasant company right now." "I'm sure. Sleep, Evelyn. You're no good to her exhausted." To his surprise, she complied without further argument, disappearing into her bedroom with a grateful nod. Carlos settled into the rocking chair beside Mia's crib, his laptop balanced on his knees. He could at least review the presentation while she slept. But as he sat in the peaceful nursery, listening to his daughter's congested breathing, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the work that had seemed so urgent that morning faded into insignificance. He set the laptop aside and simply watched her sleep. This miracle he'd nearly missed knowing. Mia woke an hour later, miserable and clingy. Carlos checked her temperature, administered the prescribed medication, and held her against his chest as she whimpered in discomfort. He walked the apartment's small living room in circles, humming a Spanish lullaby his own mother had sung when he was ill, feeling Mia's tiny body gradually relax against him. 3 hours passed before Evelyn emerged from her bedroom, looking slightly more human. She stopped in the doorway, watching Carlos read a board book to Mia, who was curled in his lap, still feverish but content. "You're still here," she said softly. "Of course," Carlos replied, as if there had never been any question. "Feeling better?" "Much." Evelyn moved to the kitchen and began making tea. "How is she?" "The fever's down slightly. She ate a little applesauce and kept it down. The medicine seems to be helping." Evelyn brought 2 mugs of tea to the living room and sat across from them. "Thank you," she said simply. "I needed that rest more than I realized." "You don't have to do everything alone anymore," Carlos said quietly, careful not to disturb Mia, who was drifting back to sleep against his chest. "I'm here now. I want to be here." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. "I'm starting to believe that." That night marked a turning point. The formal visitation schedule remained, but its boundaries softened. Carlos began calling daily, not just to speak with Mia but to check on Evelyn as well. When an assignment required her to travel to Washington, D.C. for 3 days, she asked if he would stay at her apartment rather than hiring a nanny. When his mother visited from Spain, eager to meet her granddaughter, Evelyn welcomed her into their home without hesitation. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, they were becoming something that resembled a family, though neither dared name it. 4 months after Carlos had appeared at the Langham Hotel in London, He invited Evelyn and Mia to his Manhattan penthouse for dinner. It was the first time they had been to his home, and he'd spent days preparing, child-proofing sharp corners, installing cabinet locks, transforming a spare bedroom into a nursery complete with crib and changing table. "This is unexpected," Evelyn commented as she surveyed the nursery with its hand-painted mural of the Spanish countryside. "I want Mia to feel at home here," Carlos explained, "for weekend visits eventually. When you're both comfortable with that arrangement." Evelyn traced the painted outline of an olive tree, recognizing the landscape. "This is your family's estate in Andalusia?" "Yes." Carlos smiled, pleased she remembered. "Where I spent my summers as a child. The only place I remember my father truly relaxing." "It's beautiful work," Evelyn said softly. "Mia will love it." Later, after Mia was asleep in her new crib, Carlos and Evelyn sat on his terrace overlooking the city lights, sharing a bottle of wine they both remembered from their time together in Madrid. "You've changed," Evelyn said finally, giving voice to what had been evident for months. "Not just your schedule or priorities, but something deeper." Carlos considered her observation, taking time with his response rather than offering quick reassurance. "I had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself," he said finally, "about what I thought I wanted versus what actually matters." "And what matters now?" Evelyn asked, her gaze steady across the small table. "Mia, obviously," Carlos replied immediately. "Being the father she deserves, creating a life where she feels secure and valued for who she is, not what she accomplishes." He paused, gathering courage for the more difficult admission. "And you, Evelyn, not in a romantic sense. I understand those bridges were burned, but as someone I respect enormously. Someone whose perspective helps me see beyond spreadsheets and market projections to what's real." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "When I saw you at the airport with Vanessa, I thought I'd made the right decision not telling you about Mia. I convinced myself you'd become exactly what I feared, someone who valued appearance over substance, someone who would see his own child as an inconvenience to be managed." "I might have been," Carlos admitted. "If things had continued on that path, seeing you with Mia that day, it was like waking from a long sleep. Everything I thought I wanted suddenly seemed hollow. And now?" Evelyn's question hung between them, loaded with possibility. "Now I'm trying to build something authentic," Carlos replied. "A life where my actions align with my values, where I'm present for the people who matter rather than constantly chasing the next acquisition or expansion." "That sounds suspiciously like something I might have said 2 years ago," Evelyn observed with a small smile. "You were right," Carlos acknowledged. "About many things." They talked late into the night, not about reconciliation or shared futures, but about Mia, about their respective work, about the changes both had experienced in the past year. It was the most honest conversation they'd had since before their relationship ended, unburdened by expectations or defenses. When Evelyn gathered a sleeping Mia to return home, Carlos walked them to the door. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for letting me be part of her life, for beginning to trust me again." "You've earned it," Evelyn replied simply, "not through grand gestures or promises, but by showing up, consistently, even when it's inconvenient." The echo of her words from their London meeting wasn't lost on either of them. Carlos watched them leave, feeling something settle within him, not completion but progress. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, it felt genuine. 6 months after that fateful encounter at Heathrow, Evelyn stood in her Brooklyn loft, reviewing photographs for her latest assignment, while Mia napped in the nursery. The space reflected both their lives, professional camera equipment sharing space with colorful toys, art books stacked beside board books about animals and shapes. She'd created a good life for them here, balanced and fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated. The doorbell rang, and Evelyn checked her watch. Carlos was precisely on time, as always. Their carefully choreographed co-parenting arrangement had evolved over months of negotiation and cautious trust-building. What had begun as supervised visits in public places had gradually shifted to Carlos taking Mia to his penthouse apartment every Saturday, returning her each evening tired and happy. She opened the door to find Carlos holding a small gift bag in one hand and coffee in the other. "I brought your favorite," he said, offering the paper cup, "and something for Mia." "She's napping," Evelyn replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The thoughtful gesture wasn't unusual. Carlos had proven himself attentive to details over these months. "She should be up in about 20 minutes. "Perfect timing then," Carlos said, following her into the loft. He'd become comfortable in this space, though he never overstepped the boundaries Evelyn had established. "How was your week?" "Good. Busy. The Antarctica series is getting significant attention. The magazine wants to develop it into a climate change special issue." "That's excellent," Carlos said, his pride evident. "Your glacier photographs were extraordinary. The way you captured the scale of the ice against that tiny research vessel." He shook his head in admiration. Evelyn felt the familiar warmth that came whenever Carlos discussed her work with genuine understanding. It had been one of the first things that attracted her to him, his ability to see her art as more than pretty pictures, to engage with the meaning behind her compositions. "How was your week?" she asked, settling onto the sofa with her coffee. "Complicated," Carlos admitted, taking the armchair across from her. "The Singapore expansion has hit regulatory hurdles. I'm flying out on Monday to handle it personally." Evelyn nodded, noting the way he spoke about business challenges now, not as all-consuming crises, but as problems to be solved within the context of a life with other priorities. The change had been gradual but unmistakable. "Will you be back for Saturday?" she asked, knowing how important the regular visits had become to Mia. "Absolutely," Carlos promised. "I've arranged the meeting specifically to return by Friday night. Nothing will interfere with my time with Mia." The conviction in his voice was something Evelyn had come to rely on over these months. Carlos had proven himself repeatedly, rearranging board meetings for Mia's doctor appointments, flying back early from business trips to attend her playgroup performances, learning to change diapers and prepare bottles with the same precision he applied to corporate acquisitions. A soft cry came through the baby monitor, signaling Mia was waking from her nap. Carlos's face lit up at the sound, and Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. The expression was so genuine, so unguarded, nothing like the controlled facade he presented to the business world. "I'll get her," Evelyn said, rising from the sofa. "She'll be excited to see you." When she returned with a sleepy-eyed Mia, the little girl immediately reached for Carlos with a delighted dada, a new development that still brought a look of wonder to his face each time. "Hello, Princessa," he said, taking her gently. "Did you have good dreams?" Evelyn watched them together. The tender way Carlos held their daughter, the absolute focus he gave her babbled attempts at conversation, the patience with which he engaged with her developing personality. These moments revealed a truth Evelyn had been reluctantly acknowledging for months. Carlos Salvador had become the father Mia deserved. More unsettling was the realization that he had also become the man Evelyn had always believed he could be, present, vulnerable, willing to prioritize relationships over appearances or convenience. The man she had fallen in love with before ambition and expectation had driven them apart. "Look what I brought you," Carlos said, reaching for the gift bag. "Something special for my special girl." Inside was a small plush globe, the continents done in different textures, the oceans in soft blue velvet. "So you can learn about all the places your mama photographs," Carlos explained, as Mia seized the toy with fascination. "And all the places we'll go together someday." "That's perfect," Evelyn said softly. "Thank you." Carlos looked up, something vulnerable in his expression. "I have something for you too, actually." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a white envelope. "This isn't what you think," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "It's not about us. It's about Mia." Evelyn took the envelope cautiously and opened it to find legal documents, custody arrangements that gave her primary custody while formalizing Carlos's parental rights and responsibilities. "My lawyers drew them up," Carlos explained, "but I've modified them based on what I believe is fair. You maintain primary custody and decision-making authority. I get formalized visitation rights and shared input on major decisions. Everything we've been doing informally, just put on paper to protect Mia's interests." Evelyn scanned the documents, noting the generous financial provisions and the explicit statement that these arrangements existed regardless of any changes in either parent's relationship status or location. "This is thorough," she acknowledged, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness evident in the provisions. "And fair. There's one more thing," Carlos said, bouncing Mia gently as she explored her new globe. "I've reorganized my leadership structure at Salvador Industries. I've appointed a CEO to handle daily operations effective next month. I'm stepping into a chairman position." Evelyn looked up, startled. "You're giving up control of your company." "Not giving up," Carlos clarified. "Redefining. I'll still guide overall strategy and maintain majority ownership, but I won't be involved in daily operations. I've spent 6 months evaluating what matters most to me, and I've made my choice." His eyes held hers steadily. "I choose to be present for my daughter, for her childhood, for the moments that can't be rescheduled or delegated. The echo of their conversation 6 months ago in London wasn't lost on Evelyn. Carlos was proving through actions rather than words that he had meant every promise. "That's a significant change," she said carefully. "The right change," Carlos replied without hesitation. "The company will thrive under Julia's leadership. She's been ready for years. I was just too controlling to see it." Mia grew restless in his arms, pointing toward her play area with determination. "Down, please," she demanded, her limited vocabulary supplemented by imperious gestures that were pure Salvador. Carlos complied, following her to the colorful playmat where she immediately began organizing toys in some system comprehensible only to herself. He sat cross-legged beside her, his expensive trousers on the floor without concern, completely engaged in her world. "I hope you're finding this story as compelling as I do. If you're touched by Carlos's transformation and his commitment to being present for his daughter, hit that like button now. Your engagement helps more people discover stories like this one about the choices that truly matter in life." Now let's see what happens as Evelyn confronts her own evolving feelings. Watching Carlos and Mia together, Evelyn felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. The man sitting on her floor, making a stuffed elephant talk to her daughter, was someone who had done the hard, unglamorous work of becoming better. Not perfect, not flawless, but better in the ways that truly mattered. "Carlos," she said softly, "why did you really end your engagement?" He looked up, his expression serious. "Because seeing you at the airport made me confront the truth I'd been avoiding. I never stopped loving you, Evelyn. I just convinced myself that love wasn't enough, that practical. Considerations and compatible lifestyles were more important than the way you challenged me to. Be better, to see beyond balance sheets and strategic advantages to what actually matters." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. "I'm not telling you this with expectations," he continued carefully. "I understand that trust, once broken, doesn't mend easily. I understand that loving someone doesn't give you the right to be in their life. I'm Mia's father, and I will always be grateful for that role, even if that's all I ever am to you." Evelyn felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you hurting me again, though that's certainly a fear, but of disrupting what we've built for Mia. This arrangement works. It's stable. It's healthy. If we tried again and failed, it would complicate everything." Carlos finished for her. "I know. That's why I haven't said anything these past months. That's why I've focused on being the father Mia deserves rather than trying to win you back. But Evelyn, I've changed. Not just in dramatic gestures or restructured companies, but in how I measure success, in what I believe matters, in who I want to be." Mia chose that moment to toddle over with a book, insistently pushing it into Evelyn's hands. "Story," she demanded. "Always perfect timing, mi amor," Carlos said with a soft laugh. Evelyn took the book, a colorful tale about a baby elephant searching for its family, and settled on the floor beside them. As she began to read, Mia nestled between them, a small hand resting on each parent's leg, connecting them physically in the way she had connected them emotionally from the moment of her existence. The scene felt right in a way that transcended logic or caution, a family constellation finding its proper alignment after months of careful orbiting. The thought terrified and exhilarated Evelyn in equal measure. Later, after Mia had been fed, bathed, and put to bed with both parents participating in the bedtime ritual, Evelyn and Carlos stood in her kitchen, the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill empty spaces with words. "I should go," Carlos said eventually, though his reluctance was evident. Evelyn took a deep breath, stepping beyond the safe boundaries she'd established. "Or you could stay for dinner, nothing fancy, just conversation. Adults talking after the baby is asleep." The hope that brightened Carlos's expression was almost painful to witness. "I'd like that very much." "This isn't a promise," Evelyn cautioned. "It's just dinner. Just us seeing if there's still something worth exploring." "Just dinner," Carlos agreed, his smile gentle. "No expectations, no pressure, just two people who share a child and a history, seeing if they might share a future as well." As Evelyn moved to the refrigerator, Carlos added softly, "For what it's worth, I think there is something worth exploring. Something worth building, carefully and intentionally, with all the wisdom we've gained and none of the mistakes we've made." Evelyn turned, meeting his gaze directly. "Then prove it," she said simply. "Not just today or tomorrow, but every day. Prove that this version of you is real and lasting." "I will," Carlos promised, "for as long as it takes." And in that kitchen, with their daughters sleeping peacefully in the next room, they began the careful work of building something new, not from the ashes of what had been, but from the stronger materials of who they had become. The following months unfolded with cautious exploration. Dinner after Mia's bedtime became a weekly ritual, sometimes at Evelyn's loft, sometimes at Carlos's penthouse. They talked about everything and nothing: her photography projects, his company's transition, books they'd read, films they'd seen. They rediscovered each other's minds before allowing themselves to consider anything more. Carlos proved himself not through grand gestures or declarations, but through consistent presence. When Evelyn caught the flu that swept through Mia's playgroup, he moved into her guest room for 3 days, caring for both mother and daughter without complaint. When her father suffered a minor heart attack in Chicago, Carlos arranged the private flight that got her there within hours, then managed Mia's care so Evelyn could focus entirely on her family. These actions spoke louder than any words could have. This was a man who understood that love wasn't about passion or convenience, but about showing up when needed, about putting others' well-being before his own comfort. 8 months after their airport encounter, Carlos invited Evelyn and Mia to visit his family's estate in Andalusia. His mother had moved back there after his father's death, and she was eager to spend time with her granddaughter away from New York's hectic pace. "It's not a romantic getaway," he clarified, careful to respect the boundaries they'd established. "My mother will be there, along with my sister and her children. It would just be a chance for Mia to connect with her family, to experience part of her heritage." Evelyn agreed, recognizing the importance of these connections for her daughter. The sprawling olive estate welcomed them with warmth that transcended language barriers. Mia blossomed under her grandmother's doting attention and the playful inclusion by her older cousins. Carlos's mother, Sophia, pulled Evelyn into the family without hesitation, sharing stories of Carlos's childhood and teaching her traditional recipes in the sun-drenched kitchen. "He was always a serious child," Sophia told Evelyn as they prepared gazpacho together while watching Carlos chase Mia through the olive groves. "So determined to make his father proud. I worried he would never learn to be happy, only successful." She squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Until you. And now Mia. I see joy in him now, not just purpose." On their third evening, after Mia had been put to bed in the room adjacent to Sophia's, Carlos suggested a walk through the moonlit groves. They strolled in comfortable silence, the scent of jasmine and olive blossoms perfuming the warm air. "I used to come out here as a boy," Carlos said, his voice soft with memory. "When my father was being particularly demanding or when I failed to meet his expectations. The trees have been here for centuries. They put human concerns into perspective." Evelyn studied his profile in the moonlight. "What would your father think of your choices this past year?" Carlos considered the question carefully. He would consider the restructuring of the company a strategic error. He would see my prioritization of Mia a sentimental weakness. He valued legacy above happiness, expansion above connection. He turned to face her directly. "But I've stopped measuring my life by what would make him proud. I'm more concerned with the kind of father Mia will remember, the kind of man I want to be in my own eyes." The simple honesty of his statement moved Evelyn more than any passionate declaration could have. This was the transformation she'd witnessed over these months, not just in his schedule or priorities, but in his fundamental understanding of what constituted a life well lived. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she admitted softly. "Not with who you were before, but with who you've become, with who you're becoming." Carlos's intake of breath was audible in the quiet night. "Evelyn, I'm not ready for promises or plans," she continued quickly, "but I want you to know that I see you, the real you, not just Mia's father or Salvador Industries chairman, and what I see matters to me. Deeply." He took her hand, his touch gentle but grounding. "That's more than I dared hope for." They stood among ancient trees, hands linked, the connection between them stronger for having been broken and carefully rebuilt. When Carlos finally kissed her, it wasn't with the passionate intensity of their past relationship, but with reverent appreciation for the present moment and all it represented. The remainder of their time in Spain unfolded with new awareness but without pressure. They continued to focus on Mia, on family connections, on creating memories that would form the foundation of their daughter's understanding of her heritage. But small changes signaled the shift in their relationship. Linked hands during evening walks, quiet conversations on the terrace after others had retired, the tentative rediscovery of physical affection. Returning to New York brought practical reality back into focus. Their lives were established, separate yet connected through Mia. Integration would require careful consideration, patience, and explicit communication. "We should take this slowly," Evelyn said as they settled back into their routines. "For Mia's sake as much as our own. I don't want her to become attached to an idea of family that might not be sustainable. Agreed, Carlos replied. We've both learned that rushing important decisions leads to regrets. I want to do this right, whatever this becomes. They established new parameters: date nights when Mia stayed with Evelyn's trusted friend Elena, family outings to the zoo or museums, occasional weekends together at Carlos's beach house in the Hamptons. They navigated the complex terrain between CEO parents and partners with deliberate care, always prioritizing Mia's security and their own authentic connection over external expectations or conventional timelines. If you're invested in Carlos and Evelyn's journey toward building something genuine and meaningful, make sure to like and share this video. In a world that often prioritizes instant gratification and perfect appearances, their story reminds us that real growth takes time and intention. Subscribe to see more content that explores what truly matters in our relationships and life choices. 1 year after the airport encounter, Carlos stood in Evelyn's kitchen preparing dinner while she finished an important call with her editor. Mia, now 20 months old and increasingly verbal, supervised from her high chair, offering commentary and occasional directions. More pepper, Dada, she insisted as he stirred the pasta sauce. You think so, Princessa? Carlos asked seriously, pretending to consider her culinary expertise. Let's taste it first. He offered her a tiny spoonful, carefully cooled. Mia's face scrunched in concentration as she evaluated the flavor, a miniature food critic with uncompromising standards. More pepper, she confirmed with a decisive nod. The chef has spoken, Carlos laughed, adding a sprinkle of black pepper to please her. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, watching them with a soft smile. These ordinary moments still caught her by surprise sometimes. The casual domesticity, the easy interaction between father and daughter, the home they had gradually created together without ever formally acknowledging it. Carlos had been spending most nights at her apartment for the past 3 months, keeping his penthouse for occasional work nights when international calls required privacy and unusual hours. They hadn't discussed making the arrangement permanent, both still cautious about formalizing a relationship that had developed organically from their commitment to CEO parenting. Meeting went well? Carlos asked, noticing her presence. Very. The Amazon Conservation Series has been approved for full funding. 6 months of work, with 3 extended field assignments. Carlos nodded, processing the implications. That's wonderful news. Your proposal was extraordinary. It means travel, Evelyn said cautiously. Not like before, no conflict zones, shorter durations, but still, time away from Mia, from both of you. They had discussed this possibility for months. The Amazon project represented exactly the kind of meaningful work Evelyn had always been passionate about, combining her artistic vision with environmental advocacy. Carlos had supported her pursuit of it without reservation. We'll make it work, he said simply. Mia and I will be fine during your field assignments. We can visit during the longer stays if that's feasible. Your work matters, Evelyn, to the world and to you. The understanding in his voice, free from resentment or conditions, confirmed what Evelyn had been gradually accepting. This was a partnership unlike any she had imagined possible, built on mutual respect and genuine support rather than compromise or sacrifice. I've been thinking, she said, moving further into the kitchen. Maybe it's time we talked about making this arrangement more official. Carlos set down the wooden spoon he'd been using, giving her his full attention. What are you suggesting? I'm not proposing, if that's what you're worried about, Evelyn clarified with a small smile. But this half-in, half-out living situation is getting complicated. You have clothes in 3 different closets. We're constantly shuttling between apartments. Mia gets confused about where home is on any given day. And your solution? Carlos asked carefully. I think we should find a place together. Something that's ours from the beginning, not one of us moving into the other's established space. A fresh start. The significance of her suggestion wasn't lost on Carlos. This wasn't just about practical logistics. It was about committing to building a shared future, about trusting that what they had rebuilt was strong enough to withstand the pressures of daily life and professional demands. Are you sure? He asked, his voice soft but serious. This isn't something we can easily undo if it doesn't work. I'm sure about trying, Evelyn replied honestly. I'm sure that what we've created this past year is worth investing in. I'm sure that you've become someone I trust not just with Mia's happiness, but with my own. Carlos crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his. Then yes, let's find a home together. Something that belongs to all 3 of us. Mia, sensing the emotional significance if not understanding the content, called from her high chair, Mama Dada, hug. They laughed and complied with her demand, creating a family embrace that included their demanding toddler. It was imperfect and slightly awkward, with Mia squirming to maintain her balance while being squished between them, much like their relationship itself, messy but unmistakably genuine. The house hunting process revealed aspects of their personalities that months of dating hadn't fully exposed. Carlos's practical considerations about security systems and proximity to good schools balanced Evelyn's emphasis on natural light for photography and character over conventional luxury. They argued, compromised, and occasionally walked away from properties that one loved, but the other couldn't envision as home. Finally, they found it, a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with history and elegance that didn't feel pretentious. It needed renovation but had good bones, high ceilings, a private garden, and enough space for Evelyn's photography studio as well as Carlos's home office. Most importantly, it felt right to both of them, a place where Mia could grow up with stability and room for adventure. The renovation process became a metaphor for their relationship, stripping away damaged layers, preserving what was worth keeping, building new elements that complemented rather than erased the original structure. They made decisions together, sometimes with heated debate, but always with respect for each other's perspective and priorities. 3 months later, they moved in, blending their separate lives into a shared home. The process wasn't without challenges. Carlos's minimalist aesthetic sometimes clashed with Evelyn's more eclectic style. Her flexible approach to schedules occasionally frustrated his preference for structure. But beneath these surface tensions was a fundamental commitment to making space for each other, to valuing the differences that had once driven them apart but now enriched their shared life. The evening after they'd finally unpacked the last box, they sat in their new garden, watching Mia explore the small fountain Carlos had insisted on installing, despite Evelyn's concerns about water safety. "She's careful," Carlos observed, as Mia approached the water with uncharacteristic caution. "She respects its power." "Like her father," Evelyn replied, "learning to respect forces he can't control." Carlos smiled, acknowledging the gentle teasing about his former need to manage every aspect of his life and business. "A necessary lesson, one I'm still learning." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, setting it on the garden table between them. "This isn't what you might think," he said quickly. "Well, not exactly." Evelyn looked at the box with a raised eyebrow. "That looks suspiciously like a ring box for something that isn't what I might think." "Open it," Carlos suggested. Inside was indeed a ring, but not a traditional diamond engagement ring. Instead, a simple band of platinum held a small, perfect piece of raw emerald, its natural form untouched by excessive cutting or polishing. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said softly. "But what exactly is it, if not an engagement ring?" "It's a promise," Carlos explained. "Not marriage, not yet, unless or until we both decide that's what we want. It's a promise that I'm committed to this journey we're on together, to building this family with intention rather than expectation, to continuing to earn your trust every day." He took her hand gently. "You don't have to wear it. You don't have to accept anything that doesn't feel right. But I wanted you to know where I stand, that this, you, Mia, our family, is my priority and my privilege, not my obligation." Evelyn studied the ring, appreciating how perfectly it captured their relationship, valuable but unrefined, natural rather than artificially perfected. "Put it on me," she said softly. Carlos slipped the ring onto her right hand rather than her left, another acknowledgement that this wasn't a conventional engagement but something they were defining for themselves. "I love you," she said simply. "Not despite our history, but because of it. Because we've both learned what matters and what doesn't. Because you became the man I always believed you could be, even when I had to walk away." "And I love you," Carlos replied. "Not as the perfect complement to my life, but as the person who challenges me to live authentically, who sees beyond what I achieve to who I am." Mia, perhaps sensing another significant moment worthy of her participation, abandoned the fountain and ran to them, demanding to be included in whatever was happening. Carlos lifted her onto his lap, and she immediately reached for the ring on Evelyn's finger, her natural curiosity drawing her to the green stone. "Pretty," she declared. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, looking not at the ring but at her daughter and the man holding her. "Very pretty indeed." The seasons changed, and their life together found its rhythm. Evelyn's Amazon project progressed, requiring occasional travel but always with clear timelines and regular communication. Carlos restructured Salvador Industries around sustainable practices, inspired by Evelyn's environmental work and his desire to leave Mia a world worth inheriting. They navigated the everyday challenges of parenting, career demands, and building a relationship with honesty and intention. 18 months after moving into their brownstone, On a crisp autumn morning with leaves painting Brooklyn in golds and reds, Carlos found Evelyn in her studio reviewing photographs from her latest Amazon expedition. Mia was at preschool, giving them rare quiet hours together. "These are remarkable," he said, studying images of indigenous conservation practices alongside destructive logging operations. "The contrast between stewardship and exploitation is powerful without being didactic." "That's what I was hoping for," Evelyn replied, pleased by his understanding of her intent. "The series needs to communicate urgency without alienating viewers with guilt." Carlos moved behind her chair, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. "I've been thinking about something dangerous," Evelyn teased, tilting her head back to look up at him. "Perhaps." His smile held a hint of nervousness unusual for his typically confident demeanor. "I've been thinking about marriage." Evelyn turned in her chair to face him properly. "That is dangerous territory. Not as a requirement or expectation," Carlos clarified quickly. "We're already committed to each other in all the ways that matter. But I've been thinking about what it might mean for us, specifically. Not as a social convention or legal formality, but as a choice we might make on our own terms." Evelyn studied his face, seeing the careful consideration behind his words. "And what conclusion did you reach in all this thinking?" "That I would like to marry you," Carlos said simply. "Not because it's expected or because it would simplify legal matters concerning MIA or our shared assets. I want to marry you because I choose you every day, and I would like to declare that choice in a way that honors what we've built together." "Are you proposing?" Evelyn asked, her tone gentle but direct. "I'm opening a conversation," Carlos replied. "One that doesn't need an immediate answer. One that we can explore together, like everything else we do." Evelyn rose from her chair, taking his hands in hers. "You know I've never been conventional. Marriage wasn't something I imagined for myself, even before our complicated history." "I know," Carlos acknowledged. "Which is why this isn't a surprise proposal with expectations attached. It's just me, telling you what I want and asking what you want." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, not avoiding the question, but giving it the serious consideration it deserved. "I want a partnership that continues to challenge and support us both," she finally said. "I want Mia to see what genuine commitment looks like, not from obligation but from daily choice. I want to keep building this life with you, whether or not we have legal documentation of it." She squeezed his hands gently. "But I also find that I want to marry you, Carlos Salvador, not for any practical reason, but simply because it feels right. Because we've earned this through hard work and honesty in becoming people worthy of each other's trust." The joy that spread across Carlos's face was unguarded and complete. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Evelyn confirmed. "But on one condition. Anything. No enormous society wedding. Nothing that's about appearance or status. Something intimate and authentic, like our relationship." "I wouldn't want anything else," Carlos assured her. "Just us, Mia, and the people who truly matter in our lives. A celebration of what is, not what others expect." 3 months later, they gathered with a small group of loved ones in the garden of their Brooklyn home. Mia, now 3 years old and taking her role as flower girl with extreme seriousness, scattered rose petals with careful precision before joining Carlos at the simple arch covered in vines and white flowers. Sofia Salvador watched with tears in her eyes as her son waited for his bride, his expression holding none of the strategic calculation or controlled poise that had characterized him for so long. Beside her, Evelyn's parents, initially skeptical of the man who had once broken their daughter's heart, had gradually been won over by Carlos's genuine transformation and unwavering commitment to both Evelyn and Mia. When Evelyn appeared, she wore not a traditional white gown, but a simple dress in deep emerald green, the color of the promise ring she still wore on her right hand. In her left, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from places significant in their journey together. Spanish jasmine from Andalusia, alpine blooms from their first trip to Switzerland, native plants from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden where they often took Mia on weekends. Their vows were honest and unembellished, acknowledging both the pain of their past and the intentional rebuilding of their present. They spoke of choice rather than destiny, of partnership rather than possession, of the daily work of love rather than its easy emotion. "I choose you," Carlos promised, his voice steady with conviction. "Not as the perfect completion of my life, but as the person who challenges me to live truthfully. I promise to remain worthy of your trust, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, to build a family where we all thrive as individuals while growing stronger together." "I choose you," Evelyn echoed, "not despite our history, but because of it. Because we've learned that love isn't about convenience or comfort, but about seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. I promise to continue challenging you when you need it, supporting you when you falter, and building with you a life that reflects our shared values rather than external expectations." When the officiant pronounced them married, Mia, who had been watching the proceedings with unusual stillness, broke protocol to rush forward and wrap her arms around both their legs. "We're a family," she announced to the laughing guests. "Yes, mi amor," Carlos confirmed, lifting her into their embrace. "We've been a family for some time now. Today we're just celebrating that truth." The reception that followed was simple but joyful. Good food, Spanish wine, photographs from their journey displayed alongside Evelyn's professional work, music that ranged from classical to contemporary depending on who had control of the playlist. There were no formal speeches or rigid traditions, just genuine connection among people who cared for each other. As evening fell and fairy lights illuminated the garden, Carlos found Evelyn standing slightly apart, watching their guests with a photographer's observant eye. "Having second thoughts?" he asked lightly, slipping his arm around her waist. "Just the opposite," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about that day at Heathrow. How terrified I was when I saw you. How certain I was that you would either reject Mia or try to control our lives from a distance. A reasonable fear, given who I was then," Carlos acknowledged. "But look at us now." Evelyn gestured toward the garden where Sofia was teaching Mia a traditional Spanish dance, while Evelyn's father played guitar. "Something beautiful grew from that terrible moment. Not by accident," Carlos said seriously. "By choice, by hard work, by both of us being willing to change and grow. Worth every difficult conversation and uncomfortable truth," Evelyn agreed. "Worth every moment of uncertainty and vulnerability." Carlos kissed her temple gently. "And worth every moment still to come. As I bring this story to a close, I want to speak directly to you. Carlos and Evelyn's journey reminds us that true transformation is possible, but it doesn't happen through dramatic gestures or sweeping promises. It happens through consistent actions, through showing up day after day, through prioritizing what truly matters over what merely appears important. If this story touched something in you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that second chances are possible, not easily granted, but earned through genuine growth and sustained effort. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most. Carlos Salvador's life changed forever in that private terminal at Heathrow, when he came face to face with the daughter he never knew existed and the woman he'd never truly stopped loving. But the real transformation happened in the months and years that followed. In midnight, feedings and board meetings declined, in playground visits and corporate restructuring, in learning to measure success not by acquisitions but by presence. Their story isn't about fairy tale romance or dramatic redemption. It's about the quiet courage it takes to rebuild what was broken, to become worthy of trust once lost, to create something authentic from the ruins of what might have been. It's about two people who chose each other not once in a moment of passion, but every day through actions that proved their words. And perhaps most importantly, it's about understanding that the greatest achievements aren't the ones that can be measured in dollars or accolades, but in moments of genuine connection and lives transformed by love expressed not just in words, but in choices made every single day. Thank you for joining me for this story. Until next time, this is Mr. Kingsley Luck Stories, reminding you that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be.